Hi, folks. Welcome to today's panel. My name is Bhavna Kodira. I'm the director of the Best Practices Institute, which is the training department here at the DNC. As part of our work in training, we are focused on constant infrastructure building and adding new resources to our online resource database, the BPI Victory Vault, and offering multiple training certification programs a year for activists and organizers across the country, covering all aspects of grassroots campaigning. So with our focus on infrastructure building, I want to introduce you to my DNC colleagues, Brencia Berry, Coalitions Director, Danae Pointer, Communications Outreach Director, Jose Nunez, Deputy Political Director for Organizing, and Raina Walters-Morgan, Director of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection, who are joining me on today's panel, Early Investments, Coalition Building, and Protecting the Right to Vote, How the Democratic Party is Paving the Road to 2022 and Beyond. So I'm going to turn things over to our panelists, starting with Jose, and just want you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your department's programming ahead of 2022. How will you engage in meaningful ways with states prior to next year's critical elections?
What a good question. Thank you, Bhavna. So, folks, my name is Jose Nunez. I'm currently calling y'all from Washington, D.C. I'm currently the Deputy Political Director for Organizing. And before this, I was on the Joe Biden campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign, and was our digital and distributed organizing director. So overseeing all of our, amidst the pandemic, trying to figure out how the heck we're going to organize every day. And I think it's important context to try to describe what is the current programming that we have available at the DNC for organizing, the organizing team. Sorry, 1 second, y'all, I'm getting some feedback. Fix that. There we go. Feedback is gone. I apologize. So in terms of the DNC, so we oversee all of our organizing programs, which include 4 different very, very important verticals. One of those is our digital organizing programming. So digital organizing at the DNC means how do we engage with all of our very millions and millions and millions of supporters on our subscriber lists. This includes social media platforms. This includes our email and broadcast SMS. If folks have ever texted organized to 43367, how do we actually engage with those folks on our lists? How do we engage with folks on our websites and different media platforms? It's everything that's encompassing just about anything that is not a one-on-one conversation. Number 2, we have distributed organizing. Distributed organizing is a model that I know we're going to get into a little bit later in the panel today, is a mode of outreach that we decentralize to our supporters. We're empowering supporters every single day, our activists, our most loyal supporters, in having one-on-one conversations with the people that in their own networks and key voters that cross even some state boundaries. That's text messages, that's phone calls, that's knocking on someone's door, that's hosting a roundtable session to have a really important conversation about a key election that's upcoming. It's voter education efforts, and ultimately it's GOTV efforts. This is a huge, powerful driver for the outreach that the Democratic Party is going to be doing in the future. And the 4th thing is our states vertical. States organizing is the way that we win, folks. We have lots of important states that we have to win, lots of Democratic races up and down the ballot. And one of the most important investments that we're going to probably talk about a little bit later today is also distributed organizing in our states. What my program does is ensures that we are supporting our state programs up and down the ballot with the infrastructure that's going to be required to reach as many voters as possible. At the end of the day, one of the biggest things that we've been trying to fix in terms of infrastructure on program is boom and bust. What do we do every single presidential cycle? We build some of the largest volunteer infrastructure every single year, and then it goes away. We can do nothing with it. And sometimes it's incredibly hard because we have state party infrastructure that also needs to be invested to maintain all of that volunteer infrastructure. My program and team is trying to focus on how do we maintain and sustain that volunteer infrastructure, put it in the hands of our supporters and our state parties on the ground, nurture that infrastructure, and make sure that it's used for good. Electing Democrats up and down the ballot, maintaining our majorities, and winning congressional, Senate, statewide, House district, House of Delegates does not matter. My team is making sure that volunteers are empowered to do that work every single day. So I'm going to stop talking now. We have lots of other good folks on this panel today. So kicking it back over to you, Bhavna.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jose. Janae, I'm going to turn things over to you. What's going on in comms world in 2022 and beyond?
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Danae Pointer. Good to be here again. My first Netroots was last year, and I got a little bit choked up at that time. And I can explain why and how that led me to be here right now. So I am the Communications Outreach Director, which is a relatively new role at the DNC as part of the communications team at large. We've got about 15 folks on our team representing the states. We've got embeds that do communications locally, working with state parties. We've got a huge research arm that works to get lots of data, polling information on our constituencies. And we've got my team, which is at the moment a team of one, but I work really closely with our coalitions and our colleagues across the DNC. And essentially, I was brought on after joining the campaign last year to really think about ways to communicate outside of the traditional channels. We do a lot of work with traditional media, with Twitter, but not so much before thinking about as much ways to reach people where they are. Looking at social media as a tool to connect with voters, thinking about special projects and ways to get our I Will Vote platform on the streets. Thinking about other media partnerships with diverse publicists and stakeholders. So that's what I do. And I can just give a little bit of background about myself. I am a city government girl at heart. I'm originally from New York City, where I started working for Mayor Bloomberg and municipal government. And working in communications there. And then I came on to the DNC War Room last year, where I also held the role as amplification and external affairs lead. So came back in March to help with 2022 planning and beyond, because saw the need to continue to think about our outreach in those different types of ways, and happy to explain more about the program that we're building up a little bit later on.
Thank you so much, Danae. Raina, can you tell us a little bit about the goals that you had in terms of voter protection and how this builds upon what we've been doing in the past and what we're hoping to do moving forward this cycle and beyond?
Absolutely. I am Raina Walters Morgan. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection at the DNC. I've been at the DNC since 2019, and what I can tell you is that the operation that we are planning ahead of 22 is decades beyond where we were just a few years ago. To give you a little bit of context, it was a department of one when I started in April of 2019. And we realized that doing things the same old way gets you the same old results. And that's something that we just cannot afford to do as we move into 22. The goals of our department are quite simple, and that's to ensure that every voter can cast a ballot and have that ballot count. But how we do that is sometimes a difficult part. The old model of voter protection was just election day volunteers and lawsuits. And what we are realizing and what we've started to move towards is building year-round infrastructure, because you can run a program that is a voter protection program a few months before the election. But what we know is that starting those programs early, building that investment and that infrastructure early, getting people on the ground early, gives us a head start to do the work that you are just simply not able to do if you stand up an operation in June, July, or August. So we do a lot of work with building state teams, or building the DNC team for sure. As I mentioned, we were an operation of one when I started in April of 19, and we are moving towards building the largest voter protection program at the DNC ever. And in addition, we also have voter protection staff on the ground. Democrats have voter protection staff in 11 states. That is unheard of. That has never happened before, to have that many people on the ground already working and preparing for 22 or preparing for a midterm election this far ahead of time. And so we understand that doing things the same old way is not acceptable. And we're really working towards building the infrastructure that's needed so that you can build those relationships with election officials, so you can see the problems that are happening early and address them before the election. Those are the types of things that we're really thinking about and moving on as we prepare for the midterms.
All right, and Brencia, can you tell us a little bit about how you've been expanding our coalition's work as we move into the next cycle?
Hi, Bhavna. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Brencia Berry. I am the Director of Coalitions and Community Engagement at the DNC. And, I just have to echo everything that's already been said by my colleagues in terms of, for us, it's really key that we invest early in building coalitions and that we do it intentionally and that we do it intersectionally. A little bit about me is I have been in advocacy work and for over a decade. And prior to coming to the DNC, I worked for Senator Warren's presidential campaign. And during that time, and I was working on coalitions, I was a caregiver for my father, who's a disabled veteran. And that informed my next role, which was as VP of Equity and Political Strategy for an organization called Paid Leave at the US. And that was all about advocating for coalitions and for programming that's going to change the way that our systems work. And so central to our strategy at the DNC for this coalitions department, which I'm really grateful that, one, our department even being created and existing, it's new. I just started in June, and a lot of us were building this department very quickly, which demonstrates the chair's investment and Sam, our ED's investment into coalitions and intentionality behind it. But central to our strategy is making sure that we're, one, working cross-departmentally to make sure that coalitions, and so what I say when we say coalitions, we mean the base of the Democratic Party. We mean women, we mean Black voters, we mean the AAPI community. And so, and progressives as well, Latinx, Native, we have hired several directors for a lot of our coalitions, women's LGBTQ and all of the others that I just mentioned. But we also are still expanding and continuing to build this department. But key to us is talking to people early from our communities, making sure that people from our communities, which are a lot of them marginalized communities, right? Making sure that they feel like they're seen and heard by the party, by Democrats. And that is the way that we will continue to win, is working cross-departmentally to make sure that coalitions are represented and a significant part of our strategy and our outreach.
Brencia, I want to follow up with a question for you. You talked a lot about intentionality. How is the DNC working with partner organizations on the ground to ensure that we are lifting up those who are doing good work in the community and we're using this as a way to use our resources effectively as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, we know that so many organizations have been doing this work for decades. And so part of our work is to continuing to partner with organizations on the ground, people that are local, that know their communities, that have been mobilizing their communities for decades, for years, making sure that we're connecting with them and being thought partners in the strategy for mobilizing our communities. An example of that is we kicked off our Hispanic Heritage Month event in partnership with Latino Victory Fund. And we are continuing to consistently work with women's groups, the disability community, and everybody that falls under our umbrella of coalitions to mobilize and organize as we gear up for 2022 and beyond. And then I'll also say we work closely with our sister committees. We're working with the DTRIP and the DSCC on strategizing on doing intentional outreach to coalitions and making sure that we're putting infrastructure, working together to put infrastructure in the states to do intentional outreach to women, youth, progressive folks, and so much more, the disability community, you name it. That is, key to us, is partnering with folks that have been doing the work.
Thank you, Brencia. Danae, I want to turn things over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how we've been working with our partners in the comm space and doing some of our expansion work?
Oh, absolutely. So, I think everybody's here because they care about our democracy and they want to see us be successful and win. I think last year, of course, our challenge collectively was to get rid of Donald Trump. It was a life or death situation at that point. And thankfully, thanks to our partnerships with folks that are in this room, we were able to succeed in doing that. Right now, I don't think we all realized how dire the situation with the Republican Party and the stronghold that Trump has on them was going to be, but the stakes continue to be extremely high. And the reliance on partners continues to be crucial as we gear up for 22 and beyond. So we do a lot of work with our partner organizations, getting research and insights from the communications team in particular to kind of guide our messaging and our strategy there. We work with partners to amplify our messages. So a lot of the work right now is keeping folks focused on the good that this administration is looking to do, the very progressive agenda that this administration is trying to push forward, and also to hold our officials accountable and to remind them what voters want and what they need. They need that safety net. So we, of course, on the communications team, do lots of amplification and kind of lifting up stories of the positive work that's being done. But we also look to our partners and spend a lot of time speaking with our partners, collaborating with our partners to get those messages out there and to make sure that the administration is successful and that we're able to achieve our goal, which is electing Democrats and pushing those values forward.
Thank you, Danae. I want to shift gears a little bit here. Obviously, we are meeting online, which means that COVID-19 is still continuing to impact us and our work. I guess my question for folks is, how did programs shift during COVID-19 and how have they continued to evolve as we move back to more traditional campaigning? And Jose, I think we'll start with you and hear a little bit about what made virtual campaigning a success and what we hope to keep and what we've gained from this.
So I think the first response is it changed everything, right? And especially and I'm going to try to come at this with an organizing lens first. I joined the Biden-Harris campaign was the later part of May, if I remember correctly. And I will never forget this moment because I think most of the leadership on a presidential campaign, we're all stressed. We're trying to figure out how we're going to spend our money for the next 6 months. And if I think in a non-COVID world, and better for worse, if I came to the campaign manager and said, I need you to invest 90% of all of your organizing investment into me, and we're not going to do any in-person work, I would probably be laughed at and I would never find a job again, right? But it changed everything because I will say at the forefront, and there is the terrible parts of COVID that we're going to continue to navigate, and there is a part of me that still believes that we have pushed ourselves to really think outside the box because we were required to do so, but we're going to take so many new learnings from it. Learnings that I felt like in the back of my mind, I was like, man, I could really be doing a lot more of this specific tactic. But if I didn't have the investment to do it, I would never know what the true scale could be. So I do want to add that additional context again. How did COVID shift program last year? It would be a lie to say that we did not do some in-person programming. We tried to, because at the end of the day, we have to be in communities, folks. And I'm going to try to tie this all back together in a big bow, full circle. You have to have visibility in communities, first and foremost. But we also had to make sure that we were not getting outran by the Trump campaign and Republicans across the country. So we had to increase 2 different modes of outreach. I'm going to start with those for a second, text and calls. We knew that traditionally we want to get people into an office. We want to make phone calls together. It's part of building community. How do you actually relate that to community itself? Can it be built online? Yes. I'm part of communities, my family and text threads. I'm part of Facebook groups that span all the way back to high school, Twitter threads. All of this is a really simple way to say, how do you actually manage people, though, in an online space to take action? It drove us to think through different platforms that we could actually create communities together, remove state boundaries entirely. People were moving, right? I even visited my family for almost 4 weeks out of the entire time of COVID. It really changed the game because then you had people that were displaced. So we had to really think about the digital modes of outreach that we can reach people. At the end of the day, for folks that are on this call, it's the biggest grassroots organizing program that any presidential campaign has ever run to date. Did we mess things up? Yes. Did we have lots of learnings that came from this? Yes. But what we actually did successfully, though, was mobilized the largest grassroots infrastructure in a presidential campaign, built that online in a place that we could just hand it over to someone. And that someone was the DNC. Why? Because the DNC in its place currently, and in all the folks, all my wonderful colleagues on this call today that are getting investment in a time that we haven't seen investment like this in our programs before, that can actually help us long term. It's sustainability factor that I was mentioning earlier. So how are we continuing to navigate COVID? Well, my program is built on the same model that we were using on the Biden-Harris campaign. We tried to transfer that infrastructure to continue to scale it, sustain it, grow it, and point it in the directions that we need to that are most important to us. For example, the Virginia, New Jersey elections right now, we have to win those states. We're currently supporting them through our text and call outreach that we were doing even last year. It's just one of those other examples. None of it's really changing. I think it's actually more investment than what we were originally investing in last year. How did I make the case for that, though? We didn't have a choice. And I feel lucky for that, just to be clear. We had lots of big ideas, but we didn't have a choice. We had to think outside the box. The last thing that I would just say, the in-person element. We are going to continue to get folks back in person if they would like to do so. But here's the beautiful thing about the work that we did last year and the infrastructure that we have now. If someone does not feel comfortable to knock on a door, guess what? We have a big wide open door for them. Come on in, we're gonna train you. We're gonna make sure that you're having effective personal conversations with voters, and you can do it from the comfort of your home and making sure you're safe. For folks that do feel comfortable canvassing, we're gonna allow you to do that. It changes the game in terms of the digital distributed infrastructure that we build that can make sure that the volunteer door is wide open. There's lots of other cool things in terms of technology. I'll just note one of them outside of the voter contact space before handing it over to my colleague, Raina. We had to also think outside the box about social media interactions. I'll never forget this moment because we were trying to think through folks that had not returned their mail ballot in quite a few states. And we tried them multiple times. Folks, sometimes we attempted people on the phones over 10 times. If you put that in the context of over 4 months, just talking about the volunteer capacity we had. But we couldn't knock on their door. And in some cases, we didn't even have their home address, or we didn't have a landline. We could knock on the door anyways because COVID restrictions. We did some really exciting things that hopefully we can pick up again in the future around what we call click to messenger canvassing. Being able to have full conversations like you would on a script on the phone or text message, all in Facebook Messenger. All of it getting back to the voter file in an efficient way. Being able to do multilingual outreach and handovers to volunteers to have personal interactions outside of just a computer interacting with them. In the end, it actually cost us only $7 per conversation. If anybody has ever been a part of an organizing program, you did a big paid canvassing operation, $7 ain't so bad. And I think that's, there's just a lot of really exciting things that we got from last year. How did COVID change us? It really opened the door for folks like me that have big ideas, and I feel very grateful for that. And then how are we continuing going forward? We're taking those good things that happened, but making sure that we're still back in person in our communities and having the important conversation that we need to have. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand it over to Raina.
Alrighty, thank you, Jose. Raina, how did COVID-19 impact access to the voting box? What advancements did we make, and what are the things that we really need to focus on in terms of safeguarding the right to vote moving forward?
Yes, COVID had a huge implication on our programs. I seem to remember the date March 15th very clearly. That is the day I was supposed to go down to Florida to help with their presidential preference primary, and we got word that the Florida Democratic Party offices were closed, and because of COVID. And over the course of the weekend, from March 15th to the 17th. We had to figure out several things. We had to figure out how on earth we were going to switch to a virtual hotline when they had not prepared to do that, so that voters who had questions could still get their questions answered. And we had to deal with polling locations closing that we didn't know were going to be closed. And for any of you who are familiar with Florida, you know they have a very decentralized program. And what that meant in reality was that there were polling locations that were closed in a county, and the Secretary of State did not have a complete listing of all of those locations. So people were either showing up to vote to a location that was no longer open, or people were not showing up to work because of COVID. To say that it was chaotic was would probably be an understatement, but here are the things that we learned. Working with the organizing teams are amazing because in that weekend, we literally solicited volunteers from all across the country to call every single Board of Elections, to search every single Board of Elections website in each county to see what information we could gather. So we spent the weekend working with organizers to help us just track down information when the Secretary of State's office was not helpful. And then it was a matter of switching the hotlines over. So the blessing in disguise is that our teams had already started experimenting with remote voter assistance hotlines. Because primary season had started quite early in 2020, and running an in-person hotline takes a lot of time and energy. Our teams had started experimenting with remote hotlines simply because we were tired and frazzled from coming into the office 7 days a week. And so we'd experimented with doing remote hotlines on the weekends. So, we're still working, but it's a little bit easier to run a hotline, say, from your home on your couch, as opposed to like getting up, going into the office, making sure all of your volunteers are in a place, ordering food, all of those things. And so once COVID hit, we really focused on the voter assistance hotlines, because what we realized is that people had questions, either because polling locations were closed or things were rapidly changing, and we needed to find a way to communicate with people. And our hotlines did the bulk of the work for voter protection in 2020. We had hundreds of thousands of people who called our hotlines, both at the national level and the state level, to get assistance and to get help that was needed. We also relied on some of our tools. We have a wonderful website, iwillvote.com, and iwillvote.com really was designed to be the one-stop shop for voters. You could find information on where to go vote, where your polling locations were. Whenever we would get information about polling location changes, we were able to post them on I Will Vote immediately as soon as we were able to get that information. And so we really drove people to that website to make sure that they had the information, whether it was to check their registration status, figure out where they were going to go vote, or even just figure out basic information about voting, the hours, what you needed, if you needed a voter ID. And so I will be very honest. I do think that there are things we are going to keep. COVID forced us to make some changes, but some of those changes were good. By having a remote voter assistance hotline, you can bring in so many more volunteers. We probably had over 5,000 people who were volunteering on the national hotline alone over the course of the year. And that's because as long as we train them and we provide them with the materials that they need, we could have people from other states who had a lot more time and who wanted to dig in and learn the election laws for states across the country to help us do that. It allowed us to expand our capacity in a way that I don't think any of us really understood was possible before COVID hit. But like Jose said, there were still some in-person operations. And despite COVID, we saw voter engagement soar. We had volunteers who completed over 70,000 poll observer shifts for voter protection programs across the country, 70,000 shifts for poll observers alone. And many of those were in person. Some of them may have been outside, some of them may have been inside, but despite COVID, people were willing to take the safety measures that they needed, masking up, washing hands, antibacterial soap, bringing their own materials to do the work that we really needed them to do. And I think that says a lot about where people were in 2020, the mindset of we're not going to let a pandemic keep us from voting, and we're not going to let a pandemic prevent us from helping people vote. And that is something that I think we're going to be able to carry over into elections as we move forward.
Thank you, Raina. I have a question for all of you, because I know this is something that you're intentionally building into all of your programs. How are we tailoring our outreach, so our program, our messaging, the materials we're creating, to communities of color, both this cycle and beyond, knowing that communities are still being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and also bearing in mind that our BIPOC communities are not a monolith, so our work does have to be community dependent. How are we starting with this today?
Very good question. So from a communications perspective, there is a lot that's being done and that's being planned in this area. I can say that when I started, the anti-Asian hate crisis was reaching peak. It was in peak crisis mode. So what we did was we launched a national ad buy in numerous languages. We did Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, and over 40 community papers in language, just doubling down and just reminding this community how much they matter, how much they are valued and part of the American people, and how we will stand and back them in the face of the Asian hate crisis. So that was where kind of we were starting. But from there, there's so much more than community papers that we are doing. Jose mentioned organizing using Facebook messaging as a way to connect with voters, social media. We know that voters are not just reading CNN all day. They get a lot of information on Instagram and on TikTok. So we have been working across those platforms to bring our messaging, bring examples of how this administration is working for the people to social in creative ways, in ways that kind of resonate more with voters across diverse backgrounds. Our chair launched a podcast called Welcome to the Party, if you haven't heard of it. But we use that as an opportunity to connect with voters, to have him in conversation with leadership from various ends of the Democratic spectrum, talking about the issues that matter most. Also talking with folks like veterans, different coalition groups, talking with women about these issues. We spend a lot of time trying to find ways to reach voters using our I Will Vote platform and bring that to the streets. We created a QR code poster recently for National Voter Registration Awareness Day, creating these posters that were given to our college Democrats and youth and activists on the ground, allowing you to check your voter registration status with the scan of a cell phone. That was hugely popular, and we'll continue to do things like that. So completely recognizing that folks, we need to meet them where they are, where they get information, make sure that those messages resonate, and that we are finding some fun in the process of doing it. And we'll continue to experiment and get those outreach methods out there ahead of 22.
Very exciting. Brencia, tell us a little bit more about how our coalitions team is doing their outreach with communities of color.
Thank you, Bhavna. I mean, really, a lot of my colleagues have already alluded to the work and the investments that we are strategizing and building upon. I mean, for us, it's really building on the Biden-Harris coalition. And how we do that is we continue to work cross-departmentally to make sure that our messaging and our organizing and our mobilization is meeting people where they are at. And so for us, the main pillars of our coalition's programming is making sure that our programming is accessible. In terms of, yes, ability is very important, and also making sure that we have that we are making sure that we have multi-language, culturally relevant programming and resources that people can use, and also that we are listening to people early. So, part of what our team is starting to do is hosting listening sessions heading into 2022. But right now, we are definitely going all in, as Jose and Danae and Raina mentioned. We're already working in Virginia and New Jersey, making sure that we're supporting the teams on the ground with multi-language literature. So, our AAPI director has been working with the teams in New Jersey and Virginia on translations and validating translations, and making sure that we're working with Jose's team and partnering on Spanish language calls. So, there is a lot of work to be done, as well as working with Reina to make sure that we are fighting back against the disenfranchisement, the war on our right to vote that is being waged against our coalitions, being waged against people that look like me, that are part of our communities, and people on this panel, right? And so we are just working across the board with everybody. And when it comes to partners, when it comes to departments, to make sure that our programming is intersectional and that we are meeting people where they're at earlier than ever and talking to communities in a way that they want to be talked to.
Jose, how is this being built into our organizing programs this cycle?
Well, I feel like I'm going to say it out loud. I feel like we go in circles because this panel is so great and we know how important this work is. So I would say, I'm going to almost go backwards. I would say that the work and my programming, ensuring that it's culturally competent, is because Brincia is at the DNC and I couldn't do it without her and her team. That's why her team and her investment is so important. But how does this look like in practice though? Brincia alluded to this a little bit. One of the most important things, and I think this is probably something that is relevant for folks that have been in the back scenes of a campaign, Spanish language phone calls is a good example. Most people pay for that, folks. And sometimes you have vendors that are not necessarily thinking about the Latino community and the different pockets you have, right? I wouldn't have someone that is in Puerto Rico and Florida making phone calls to a Mexican-American on the border of Texas, because it's very different cultures and communities. We at the DNC are making sure that we're building supporter communities together that actually speak to the community that they're from, utilizing those personal networks that they have, because ultimately what I care about on the organizing side is empowering those grassroots activists on the ground to have the resources to be effective in organizing their communities, not only for electoral success, but really any kind of objective that they have in the future, whether that be with their county party, their state party, or local Democratic official. That's what we're really trying to do, is empower the folks where they're coming from. So back to larger strategy, trying to reach people where they're at. We hear a lot about that, but once they get in, what do we do with them? The resources we provide them with is cross-platform, cross-modal, does not matter how they want to talk to their folks. We're going to give them the resources to do it, the support systems to come back. Ultimately, they're going to be the most effective in knowing how they converse with their communities. We're just the resource-driven apparatus for them to be successful. And I think that's the best way I can explain it. Obviously, very, very intelligent, smart people to check and make sure that my team is conversing with these folks in the proper way is also very important.
Thank you, Jose. I love everything that you talked about. I know that was something really impactful to my family last cycle, was their ability to make calls to folks in their community, or my mom getting to WhatsApp her friends about things, and just loving the ability to get involved in a way she never had before. So it's exciting that we're continuing that moving forward. And Raina, I'll turn things over to you to wrap us up a little bit on this coalition's question in terms of voter protection.
Mm-hmm. You've probably seen the news that's happening across the country. There have been over 400 bills to limit access to voting in 2021 introduced in state legislatures across the country. 19 states have enacted 33 laws that make it harder for Americans to vote. Voter suppression tactics, quite frankly, target people of color. They target people who, despite for some of us, have had to fight for access to the ballot box to keep us from voting. If you look at some of the places, like you probably remember the Georgia primary last year and those horrendously long lines, look to see who is in the lines. It is very, very clear that, there are policies and laws that are being put in place because they hope that people of color won't vote. The good thing is that we're resilient and we are turning out in record numbers despite the efforts to limit our access. And even as we see legislatures across the country push to limit access to voting, people are fighting back and people are doing that work. That is honestly part of the reason why we are so invested in building that voter protection infrastructure in states, because what what you can do when you start that work early is that you can build relationships in communities. It is my ideal goal to see our volunteers come from the communities that they work in, that they live in. It is my goal that, you won't have to have people swooping in, on election day to help observe elections, and that you have people in those communities who understand how the laws are impacting their communities, talking and working with people in their communities to protect the right to vote. That is what our goal is. And when you start early, you can build those relationships, and you can recruit those volunteers to help us reach those goals. Another thing that we're doing, one, quite frankly, is to build the bench. This work is not always very diverse. And that was one of the goals that I personally had coming in as a voter protection director for the DNC. It's not a secret that people who have tended to volunteer in voter protection in the past have been older, white, retired lawyers. And we still have a place for our older, white, retired lawyers. We always will. But we have to make sure that we're bringing in volunteers, again, who look like the communities that they live in and who are serving in those communities. So one of the things that we're doing, so excited about this, we're building a program called the Campaign Readiness Bootcamp. And the next session of this is going to focus on voter protection. Part of the reason we're doing that is because we want to bring in diverse staffers who then can go to states and then bring in diverse volunteers. And so we're really excited about that. That is just one of the things that we are doing. We work with Brencia's team. It's no secret, she mentioned it, like there's a lot of work that we do that is very much aligned, and there are opportunities to work together and to make sure that programming that we're thinking about is aligned with the programming that her team works on. And so those collaborations happen, and they're really important. And then finally, I'll mention our voter assistance hotlines. In 2020, our voter assistance hotline supported over 10 languages. And those are things that we are thinking about and gearing up towards as we prepare for 22 as well.
Amazing. Just everything that everyone spoke about is just getting me very excited for the midterms, which is, I think, a fun thing to say when we're able to build out communities that are representative across the country, which is exciting. So last question to round us all out, and then we'll take a few questions. So we need all hands on deck in order to win in 2022, which means we need to keep our grassroots community of activists and volunteers engaged and keep them engaging early. So how are we working to keep the momentum from 2020 going into the midterms and beyond? And Jose, we'll start with you.
Well, I think I'm gonna probably jump in and answer a question on accident, but there's lots of ways to get involved with this, folks. What we've been focusing on for the last 8 months is ensuring that going back to that most important volunteer base, which I'm sure there's people, this is what's exciting. I did a panel recently, and someone in the chat was like, I was a part of the Yomando Contigo call community. And the space is so large that what we do on my team is to ensure that we have a space for people to come back at any given time. So what can we be doing, and what are we doing right now? Every day, there are supporters having conversations in their community, online, offline, doesn't matter where it's at. Number two, we're actively supporting Virginia and New Jersey coordinated campaign elections. I know we might get to a question on that one pretty soon here. We have folks that are helping us with very specific types of items, scoping out technology and testing those technologies before we make big decisions on how we actually text voters, how we call voters, how we canvass voters in person. There is always going to be something to do. For now, maybe not on Saturdays and Sundays after the election. We're going to need a break for the staff, but obviously for volunteers, the work never ends, and we always have resources available. That's the beauty of having a digital in-person hybrid operation, and that's what we're trying to focus on. So anyways, to wrap that up, there's always something to do. My ask to everybody on this call right now is that you go to democrats.org. You're going to get a big, beautiful splash page that our team is working on to direct you into the most important volunteer ask. Things like that are the ways that we're making sure that folks are activated no matter what time they come to us or what their priorities are, what they want to do. So I'll stop there. Back to you, Bhavna.
Thank you. Reina, what are we doing to keep folks engaged and involved to 2022? And what's your ask for folks right now?
Unfortunately, voter suppression has become the main political strategy of the Republican Party this year. And so there have been many opportunities for us to engage volunteers. I have to give a shout out to Texas. The work that the folks on the ground in Texas were able to do, the voter protection team in Texas specifically, was really outstanding in extremely difficult circumstances. For those who may not be familiar, Texas had made it a point to try and pass one of the most restrictive voting rights, bundle of voting rights laws in the country. And you probably saw the actions that the state legislators took with the walkouts. But what you probably didn't see was that the voter protection team was working behind the scenes to get volunteers to those hearings, to line volunteers up to testify at hearings and speak about how important it was to preserve voting access. They were working with legislators behind the scenes, giving them information that they needed to help make decisions about the votes that they were going to have to take. And so this year was, I think, quite an extraordinary year in terms of seeing what people can do on the ground when you have a year-round infrastructure and when you have staff on the ground for voter protection who are focused on the many cycles of what voter protection can look like when you don't have an election immediately around the corner. And that is, monitoring legislation, tracking legislation, and making sure that the bills that are coming through these legislatures are not rolling back the right to vote without people knowing it. And I think, unfortunately, that was what people hoped would happen, was that they would be able to just get some of these bills through without people noticing. So I have to give a shout out to Texas because they were able to mobilize their volunteers in a way that was really impactful, again, despite really difficult circumstances. And we're all hands on deck for Virginia, like Jose mentioned. Virginia is in a tough position of having elections every single year. And so while some people in other states are burned out, they don't want to think about voting, there are elections happening in Virginia. And, just to give a sense of how important this election is, there was a study that came out in 2018 that ranked Virginia 49th in terms of ease of voting. There are only 50 states. So having Virginia ranked 49th in terms of ease of voting gives you a sense of how difficult those voting laws were. But what happened was that voters went out and they put Democrats in office who supported voting rights. And in that time, they have made Election Day a state holiday. They have expanded early voting opportunities. They have made election changes that have really made a difference. And I will say that I would put money on the fact that if they do this study again, that Virginia won't be ranked 49th. They would be ranked near the top. And that's what's at stake. And that's why, we are all hands on deck for Virginia. But quite frankly, there is some fatigue because there are some people who are like, oh, I just volunteered. Like, you need me again. Yes, we do. We absolutely need you again. And so, if you've got time and energy, Virginia, we need some hotline volunteers. We need poll observers. If you live in Virginia, you can be an inside observer. If you're not in Virginia, but you're close by or want to go, you can be an outside observer. There are things that you can do in terms of voter protection that will be very, very, very helpful as we move forward. And then to really blow your mind, primary start in Q1 2022. Texas has their primary on March 1st, and North Carolina's primary is March 8th. And so as soon as we finish with Virginia, we're going to get volunteers ready to start volunteering for primary season in 2022.
Amazing. Bruncie, I'm turning things over to you now. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're keeping folks engaged? And I'd also specifically love for you to speak a little bit about how we're building pipelines for both volunteers and staff across the country, across communities across the country, so that representation is really becoming an important part of our work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, and as I mentioned this earlier, equity is like central to my values. And what that means is that when it comes to marginalized communities and people of color, people with disabilities, women, just all of the identities that coalitions represent. We have to take an extra step to make sure that we're removing as many barriers as possible to engage people and make sure that they feel like they can belong and be a part of this process. And so, Raina mentioned earlier, there's several aspects and ways that we are being intentional about not just engaging people for their vote, but making sure that we're building up leaders and that we are getting people involved in the process early to be leaders in this work. So there's the Campaign Readiness Project, which we are going all in on, and they've done several iterations of this boot camp and are committed to making sure that these cohorts are diverse. And that's one aspect. But we're also investing in coalitions and programming in the states, coalition staff in the states. So people who are passionate about their communities and want to do intentional outreach or feel a sense of belonging with coalition work, we're also doing that. But I think just broadly, all of the hiring that we're doing, we have internship programs just across the board. We are working and being intentional in trying to make sure that we are building up leaders that reflect our communities, the base of the party, and in all aspects, even in party leadership as well. So I'm really grateful that Chairman Harrison is absolutely committed to that. And we are continuing to do the work, like I said, to go the extra step to try to minimize those barriers for people that look like everybody on this panel and so much more when it comes to constituency and coalitions work.
Thank you, Brencia. And Danae, I'll turn things over to you to round us out. How are we keeping the momentum going from 2020 and taking us to 2022 and beyond?
No problem. So I work in communications. You all see the news. It is stressful AF right now. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of, the progress that is being made under this administration, the work that's being done to move forward an extremely progressive agenda, and the things that are being done to help the American people, which, as Democrats, that is our value. We want people to have a safety net. We want people to have opportunities. We want people to have access to the opportunity to build wealth for their families, to have clean air. These are all things that we are fighting for and that we elected Joe Biden to help us accomplish. I think if we focus on, the crises in the news cycle, we lose sight of the fact that, 10 months in, we've passed the American Rescue Plan. We've put checks in bank accounts. We've put shots in arms. We have gotten kids back to school. COVID-19, we are stemming the pandemic. There are so many positives that we can look to now. I got choked up last year because my kid was at the time a year old. 6 months into her little life, she was in quarantine. Now she's in daycare, thank God. But, there are so many positives, I think, that we can look to, and that in the communications team, we look to amplify and uplift to remind people that it's working and it's a process. But that's why we need your help. Because if people don't share those positives, if they don't, continue to talk about ways that the rescue plan is benefiting their families, it's really easy to get lost in, the sauce of what the Republicans are trying to do. They're trying to take away our right to vote. They're trying to take away our, ability to choose. They are trying to do everything they can to hold Americans back. So I think, to round things up and to, look ahead to the future, our job together, working with you all, as activists, as organizers, as community leaders, is to keep people focused on, I think, the good, that Democrats are, that we stand on the values that we stand on, and the importance of continuing to be civically engaged in the midterms and getting people to vote. It is mission critical that we continue to get folks back to the polls, not focused on the negative, but again, the positives. And with your help, I think we can do that. So thank you, and I will pass it back to Bhavna for any other questions that you may have.
All right, thank you to all our panelists. I think we have time for 2 questions here, so I'm going to direct the first one at Jose. Jose, can you tell us a little bit about how the DNC is building out distributed organizing programs this cycle?
Yes, so number one, there are 2 ways that we do this. So we have more than 40 distributed organizing staff in states as we speak. These are folks that, and again, just for folks that may not know what that model is, the sole purpose of the distributed organizing model is to decentralize the power, the infrastructure itself, to the supporters that are building teams to be even more successful in our outreach and scale of programs, but also the personalization of the communication that's happening. So in our state programs, again, how do we combat some of the boom and bust volunteer infrastructure that we see year to year? Let's invest in the staff early. I think in a perfect world, I would love nothing more than to hire tens of thousands of organizers right now, and let's ship them to the states and let's get going 2 years early. I can't do that. So how do we, though, using our learnings again from 2020, expanding our reach through some of these methods and distributed models? Let's give that to staff in the states, and this is going to allow us to actually make sure that we have even bigger, stronger infrastructure that is going to be necessary for the midterms in 2022. We also do that nationally. We have folks, volunteers from North Dakota, South Dakota, Washington State, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. It does not matter. We have people from everywhere that just want to come to the community that they know from last year, and they just want to be supported and directed to some of the highest priority actions that we have available to them any given time. So that is the best way to explain a distributed model, and what we're doing currently at the DNC. It's providing an online space, training systems, active engagement around organizing priorities through all these different distributed methods of outreach: calls, text messages, canvassing, roundtable discussions, in-person work, and even digital organizing that even Danae was speaking to a little bit earlier as well. I hope that's helpful.
All right, and I think last question for both Reina and Jose. Can you tell us a little bit about how folks can get involved in the elections in Virginia and New Jersey this year?
I can go first. So if folks can go to democrats.org, again, that is democrats.org. You should be, if you're visiting the site for the first time, you should be seeing a beautiful splash page to direct yourself to go make calls for Virginia. Why do we need to make calls in Virginia? Right now, we are leading into the final weeks of the election. I will make a plug. If you are near the state of Virginia, we can always go knock on some doors. I just did it recently. Of course, wearing a mask. It was actually wonderful. It's been a long time since I knocked on some doors. It's been almost 2 years. It was just really great to have lots of good conversations with Democrats. Second is just making sure we make lots of phone calls if you can do that from home. We have lots of training and systems, back to what I was describing earlier. If it's your first time, don't worry, please sign up and join us. Again, that's democrats.org. The last thing you can do as well, if that doesn't work, you can text organize to 43367. Again, that's organize to 43367. I'll kick it over to Reina.
All right. Virginia, all hands on deck. If you are interested in maybe volunteering for the National Voter Assistance Hotline, you can always reach out to us at vopro@dnc.org. That's VOPRO@dnc.org, and we'll get you trained up. And then also you can support Virginia directly. They have a great website called the Virginia Turnout Project. And I am actually trying to find the website. It's vademocrats.org/VOPRO volunteer, VOPRO volunteer. And on that webpage, you can find out information on how to phone bank to protect the vote in Virginia, how to be a poll observer in Virginia, and how to operate, how to volunteer for the Virginia Voter Assistance Hotline. We will be happy to have any help that you can provide. So again, if you don't remember any of that, what you can, if you remember the vopro@dnc.org email, will get you everything that you need.
All right, thank you, Raina. Thank you to all of our panelists today and all of our attendees. If you have any specific questions for folks, feel free to connect with us on the app. But thank you all for being here and for helping us be a part of the movement both in 2021, 2022, and beyond.